All right. If somebody in the back of the room could get the door for us. Yep. Thank you very much. All right. So this is the ACE working group at IETF 123. If you're at any other IETF, I would like your time machine. And this is the ACE working group, Authentication and Authorization for Constrained Environments. Here's all the important information you should know by now since it's Thursday. If you've been at any other IETF working group session, you're familiar with this. But there's a lot of things that are very important, like how we handle intellectual property and anti-harassment and code of conduct and copyright and patents and working group processes and privacy and so on. Please make sure you're familiar with all this information before you participate. And then we'd like to call out the IETF Code of Conduct. In order to keep the meetings running smoothly, please treat all of your peers here with respect. And then we have the following agenda. We have 5 minutes reserved, but that's just the smallest time increment we ever use. We are right at the end of our first 5 minutes, so we're already 4 minutes ahead of schedule. And so next we will have the message from the security AD, where we'll probably end up another 4 minutes ahead of schedule.
Sure. Hi. Traditionally, I've been a little bit slower on the ACE documents than some of the other working groups that I manage, and partially that's my fault. Partially it was a gentleman's agreement when Francesca was still AD that some of these had lots of cross references, and so one document in the cluster didn't really have as much needed speed compared to other ones. But as a result of that, I have been a bit slow in doing some of the ACE documents. So I do apologize for the slowness. I finished one that I think was 250 plus days waiting on me just this Monday. So I will expect feedback from the authors and we'll move it on quickly. And then there's the one other document that's really slow. That's now the first in my list of all documents to do, and that is the Oscar GM admin one. So please just keep on going with fast speeds and make me the slow factor in the process. I said, do not slow down for me.
Yes, I was going to say you might not have to slow down too much because I also occasionally get slowed down, but I will attempt to speed up with you, and we'll try to get things, keep things moving at the speed you guys deserve. All right, up first we have ad hoc OS core profile. And let me see if I get the clicker working for you. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, it's really loud. Oh, it works. Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Göran Selander. This is the ad hoc OSCOR profile of ACE. And we're in version 8 now. These are my co-authors standing in front of the cathedral. And this will be a pretty short update on the state of the document. So I'll first give a recap and then go for the main changes and finally the next steps. So as you may recall, this is a profile of ACE. And like all profiles of ACE, there is a request for an access token from a client to an authorization server. And then there is how you use this access token with the client, with the resource server. And in this profile, you're using ad hoc and OSCOR. So it's a little bit about how you carry the access token and the different options of ad hoc that defines this profile. So what you have in this case, this example is a optimized forward message flow. So using the ad hoc forward message flow and also combining ad hoc and OSCOR into 2 round trips. So in this flow, you see the access token is carried in ad hoc message 3, which is a great location for the access token because you have authenticated the resource server and you have full protection. All the keys are derived, you have full protection of the access token. And you also are able in this optimized flow to get the resource access request in the second round trip. So it's basically 2 round trips with authentication, authorization, and resource access. Some other examples include the reverse message flow when you start out, instead of starting out ad hoc with the first message, you start out with a trigger. And then you all the ad hoc messages are going in the opposite direction. And this is useful in certain cases. This is all about hiding the identity of the initiator. And if we look at another example, which is the group audience case, when you have multiple RSs, say, for example, that you have multiple devices with a common sensor, and you want to reach out for all these sensors at one point, then you can do this multicast trigger, the first message 0 ad hoc, if you like, and then you get back, maybe not all sensors are available, you get back a number of responses, and then you can select or you can pick some of those to complete and get those sensor values in an authorized manner. So that's the background, and the new things in this version is mainly looking at things for improving the information flow. So we have a couple of new EDA items. We have looked at the ad hoc information and what it actually needs to contain, and quite a few clarifications and editorials. So there are 2 EDA items. Let's call them A and B, just for the sake of this presentation. And this EDA item contains as a value, so EDA item are the extensions of ad hoc for your information. And this EDA item A contains as value the AS request creation hints, or it is empty. And if it's empty, then it's asking in the next ad hoc message to provide the AS request creation hints. And the AS request creation hints, those are previously defined. Those are used in the framework for obtaining information about the authorization server, helping the client to formulate a good request for an access token. So it might not know. So it's assumed that the client, it knows the resource server location, but it doesn't know exactly the resources, and it doesn't know where the authorization server of this resource server is. So it's, in this case, using this EDA item, you could basically start directly with the second flow here, you could start the authentication with this resource server, including this EDA item A, and then you get back the EDA item A, including the resource creation hints, and then you use that with the first flow. So you do the authentication and the request for the access token, and you get back the access token just in time to put it in ad hoc message 3 and to carry out the resource access. So this item, the request creation hints, contains more information than is needed or available at this time. So there are certain fields that should not be used in this case. And that's at the last bullet there. I'll skip over that. We also define another EDA item, which is even simpler. So it basically only have, it's always empty, and it's always saying, please send me your authentication credential by value. So as you remember, in ad hoc, you have different choices for how you carry your authentication information. You can either have it by value, so your certificate, your CBOR web token, or your raw public key could be carried directly in the message, or you could carry a reference to these. And that turns out, incidentally, turns out to be very handy when you have post-quantum setting, when there are huge authentication credentials. Both public key and signature could be enormous. So you don't like to pass it around unnecessarily. And in this case, with this ED item, you could basically have the default that you always send the reference, because only when you include this, you actually say, by the way, I actually need your credential. That's the only item. And this is particularly useful then in ACE, because you might have an access token, but you might have lost your the authentication credential of the other of the resource server. It applies to EAD1, message 1, and EAD2, either in the reversal message or forward message flow. So that's the new item. And then we did some clerical work. So there is something called ad hoc information, which is supporting to set up an ad hoc application profile. And this is information carried in the ACE protocol. And some of this information we think didn't really belong here. Information specifically about OSCORE was removed. And we also made a labeling of this information, or rather a partition into prescriptive and non-prescriptive, where the prescriptive is marking those information elements that needs to be complied with to complete the session. So this is also useful for application profiles. And that's many of these changes here, or new features, are actually useful also in ad hoc in general, but specifically for the setting up an ad hoc session with ACE. Next steps. We think we are done basically with the protocol. We'd like to do another iteration on the reverse message flow and to go through the implications of access token in different messages, and to be able to provide good recommendations for developers who are going to make the choice between forward reverse flow and where to carry the access token. And then there are a few other things which are sort of a little bit corner cases. You can have multiple audiences, RS belonging to multiple audiences, and you can have you think of client having multiple public keys and which public key to use with authentication credential. So that's what we think is needed for this to complete. And let's hope we do it until the next meeting. And that's my last slide. Any questions or comments? I hear none.
Mine were already resolved in chat.
Christian, go ahead.
Mine were already resolved in chat. So thanks for doing this. That's good.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Looks like that's it for questions. Oops. I'm trying to make sure we get the right set of slides here. This one, right? All right, go ahead. Oh, let me give you the clicker.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Hi, this is Marco. This is an update on the workflow and params document that has quite a broad scope that I try to summarize here. That's where we are now. Something even went away, but still, it's a lot of points, and it's intended to formally update the main ASRFC in 9200 and a few more, but with respect to really cherry-picked details. The two main contributions are on one hand, an alternative execution workflow of the framework that now has a particular name, just not call it alternative workflow, but we can call it new or alternative informally. And in that workflow, the authorization server uploads the access token to the resource server on behalf of the client that can even be, as an extreme case, totally unaware of the existence of something like ACE altogether. And the second major thing is updating a number of parameters of ACE or defining a new one. And most of them are in the interest of supporting and enabling that new workflow. Other ones are in the interest of concretely enabling the issue of access tokens for multiple servers at once as members of a group audience. There's a few other things. We have improved the semantics of the ACE profile parameter as a suggestion from Christian, I think at doubling time for an indication of preference of the profile to use from the client when requesting a token. Since we have introduced in other documents, including the ad hoc underscore profile of ACE credentials by reference, we are defining at least one mechanism for the client and the AS to sync in band on the exchange of the credentials of the client and resource server by value that always works, of course, or by reference instead, avoiding any deadlock, basically. In this version, I'll come back with a few details on that. We have also just introduced a new ACE error code that we think was missing and was becoming more and more important as work was happening on profiles based on asymmetric authentication credential, meaning the AS fails to confirm or verify proof of possession of the private key of the client. I'll get to that. We also deprecated long ago the original format for the payload of error messages from the AS mostly, and now we plan to rely on the problem details format that was standardized a couple of years ago. And barely editorially, we found a more accurate formulation of some requirements that the framework put on profiles that are defined in the appendix of ACE and a bit edited here. Okay, as updated its version, some editorial things that I try to do consistently over and over in ACE documents. The co-op RFC from core uses a certain definition of endpoint. That definition is not used here. Endpoint means something quite different. So it's good practice to have in the terminology section a disclaimer that we are not using the co-op definition of endpoint. And after some interaction with the RFC editor in other documents, we converged to the way to state that, and I'm trying to use it consistently. Now it's here too. And they also made me notice a weird thing, but the IANA registry we are referring here at some point includes the word registry in its actual name. It can be a bit weird, but noted and fixed. I had some minor editing in the order of sections too. It made more sense actually to have the amendment, the editorial amendment of those two requirements and profiles really at the end. Now it reads a bit better because of that change. I could make also some minor fixes in the IANA consideration other than properly using the distinction between registry and registry group. I noticed that we were inconveniently splitting considerations about two registry that were first touched as to new registrations and then later on again for the sake of updating existing registration. Now there's just one section per registry and it tells everything we have to say about that registry. And also some updated to references. Notably, the last one, the RFC editor again made me notice that the latest version to use, and we're referring to SHA-2, is actually a version from 2015. So for information, if you have to refer to that, well, grab the reference from here. I think it comes back again in the next presentation, by the way. All right, more on the technical side. Yeah, that's the new point I mentioned before. Error handling on the AS upon receiving a request for an access token to issue, and a new error code related to a particular situation. So when using asymmetric authentication credential, the token request that the client sends to the RS can include a RexCNF parameter, and other than weird cases, it's supposed to include an authentication credential conveying the public key of the client. That is used as POP key and bound to the token. Now, per the framework and per the RFC defining that parameter, the AS is supposed to achieve or confirm, if it was achieved before, proof of possession of the corresponding private key of the client. there are different ways to do that. It can be achieved before relying on a trusted third-party vouching for the client. It could have happened in an earlier session between the client and the AS, or even in-band now in that message with some parameters dedicated to that, as we are defining in yet another profile. Doesn't matter. If the AS fails to achieve or confirm proof of possession for that private key, of course, the request must be rejected. And then we note that there's no explicit error code to say exactly that and to tell the client, do something, prove your possession to me when you try again. So it was as simple as defining that error code in the same already existing registry. And it's totally seamless to adopt even if in the new format of error payload based on problem details. It's just about putting the same code in the field of that new format instead of in the new format. So that was also about requesting the corresponding registrations into involved registries, starting from an auth registry. And there you can notice there is already an error code that is quite similar, but it's actually a very different thing. It's still related to achieving proof of possession, but specifically with the depop mechanism that implies the AS giving the client an nonce, and it implies using a signed JWT to be transported in an HTTP header of the token request. So it's something quite different, although possible to correlate. And yeah, I still believe it's worth to define a simpler and more general error code here for ACE and, well, possibly OAuth for what it's worth. Okay, a bigger update instead. I got back to check the details of these two new parameters that were defined before already, to-rs and from-rs. They were introduced to practically enable the use of the new workflow altogether when using the OSCOR profile of ACE that otherwise would not be possible. And that's because in that profile, when the client uploads the access token to the resource server, it's not only about providing the access token, but there's also an exchange of parameters within the two. So of course, if we rely on the new workflow and the AS acts as a relayer, well, it has to be provided with that additional information to be exchanged back and forth between C and RS. That's possible between these two parameters. I noticed that their general design was a bit too biased by the intended use case of the OSCOR profile, and it was not good enough in general terms. So I got back to that to try to make it better in general without changing a bit in its actual applicability for the OSCOR profile. But to recap, to-rs is a parameter for the token request that the client sends to the AS, the request for an access token, and it really has to coexist with the token upload parameter. So this is really for when using the new workflow. And it includes information that in the process of uploading the access token to the RS, the client wants to relay to the RS, just like the client would do instead when using the original workflow. And well, the dual parameter from RS is included in the token response if the new workflow was used, and if when doing so, the upload of the access token was successful. And that all matches the presence of other parameters with their values. Well, this from RS parameter would include the parameters that the RS returned to the AS, just like in the case when those were returned straightforward to the client when using the original workflow. Right, what was missing? I think because of the bias, again, a more general open attitude towards other situations with different profiles where not only a transport profile of ACE, but possibly an application profile of ACE was considered. And in particular, I noted possible instances of RFC 9594 group communication and key management handled with ACE. So trying to generalize this, I expanded a bit the semantics of to-rs to be as such. Its presence in the token requests means that, well, C is still trying to include information to be relayed to the RS, but also expecting, in case of successful token upload, information from the RS put back in the token response with the from RS parameter. As to its value, it can be null to say, well, I still want to hear from the RS later on, but me personally, I have nothing to say. If I have something to say, right now is defined as a CBOR byte string that can be tagged. On the byte string in itself, its value is really the representation of a CBOR data item that practically is supposed to be a CBOR map, but it can be general. And well, in there, the client is supposed to put what the client have delivered directly to DRS using the original workflow. It can be tagged because if it's not tagged, the AS is supposed to prepare the token upload request to DRS using the same content format that is expected to be used for that message in the considered ACE profile. If it's tagged instead, that's supposed to be overridden, and by following the instructions indicated by the tag, the AS is supposed to use the content format for that request corresponding to the tag. And there's nothing really new to define here because thanks to RFC 9277, if a co-op content format exists, there's a deterministically computed corresponding tag number that essentially signals that content format. And yet there are cases where this is actually useful. For example, if you try to combine the DTLS transport profile base, well, you are supposed to send the token with application CWT content format, I think. With the use of an application profile base, for example, for key management for group communication, as an instance of 9594. And in that case, when uploading the access token, the client may want to exchange some more parameters, and the content format becomes application ACE plus CBOR. So that's why you deviate. The AS cannot imagine that, and you can give it an explicit indication with the tag number. The other side is simpler. Of course, from RS is included because it is supposed to be is a CBOR byte string that can be empty if no payload has come from the RS after the successful upload of the access token. Or again, it can have a value, and in that case, it specifies what the RS returned, and it can be tagged. It is tagged if the response from the RS was indicated an explicit content format, and in that case, it's tagged with the tag number that reflects that content format. Essentially, it was all about giving more guidance to the AS that otherwise can be a bit lost or even do something wrong if the right thing to do is a deviation from what the transfer profile base used says. With this guidance, the AS is just supposed to receive the token request. If 2RS is not null, complete the package of information received from the client, basically adding the access token, and send the post request to the RS, including that bundle and possibly forcing a certain content format depending on the tag indication. The other direction is simpler. It's just about building from RS using what the RS returned and putting a tag if the response from the RS had an explicit content format. And this doesn't change a bit for the actual case we had in mind all along, where there's no deviation and it's pretty simple, and the example didn't really change from last time. Considering particularly the OSCOR profile, there's going to be an access token request from the client to the RS, where the 2RS parameter is included, since there's an intention to use the new workflow. And that parameter is a CBOR byte string, and the value is the binary representation of a map that includes the two parameters, ID and nonce, that normally the client would send to the RS. No need to tag here, so the AS can go for the post request to the RS using the content format expected to be used in that profile, which is application ACE plus CBOR. So nothing to add, nothing to say in those terms. And the response from the RS comes, and it provides an ID and the nonce from the RS. They are again put into CBOR map and coded as a CBOR byte string in turn in the from RS parameter, as you can see in the green box. And here again, there's nothing to say because the content format used is just what expected per the ACE profile. Yeah, that was for the updates in this version. As the next steps, of course, there's more to do. I think there's a number of things that benefit of examples of message exchanges here, especially for the error codes and error handling introduced. And on the new workflow in itself, we still have to define a bit better the actual processing that happens at the RS when receiving an access token. And one more parameter possibly to add to disambiguate in case of some corner cases that can happen when the token is uploaded for dynamically updating access rights. And there's already a placeholder proposal at the moment in an appendix of the draft. Notably, we still have an issue opened by Christian some time ago on clarifying what using ARC-CNF can mean when the token is issued for a group audience. That's what we have for now. Comment, reviews anytime are welcome. Thank you.
All right. Any questions on this one, or we'll move on to the next one?
The next one is way simpler.
Good. This one's correct?
That's the same again.
Oh.
I can do a bis, but...
Oh, it's this one. You're right.
Okay, thanks. Hi again. This is an easier draft, I believe, well, in version 2 now. And it's proposing additional formats to use for the authentication credential when using the DTLS profile of ACE in asymmetric mode. Yeah, to recap, that profile was defined in RFC 9202. It can be used in symmetric or symmetric mode, but focusing on the asymmetric mode, it provided really only one way to proceed, an RPK mode where the authentication credentials were raw public keys and exactly encoded only as raw COSI keys, really. This update is simply about enabling additional formats, all for the asymmetric mindset, but some new formats for the RPK mode itself, but also certificates. This is also seamlessly applicable in case instead of DTLS, you particularly use TLS security protocol. And well, the work in the ACE world about that was already done in RFC 9430. Yeah, as a background, this is extending the original existing RPK mode to enable two new credential types, the CCS, standardized, possible to transport by value, and also raw COSI keys, but transported by reference. And those are identified by recently standardized CW3 confirmation method, CKT. But then we also defined a brand new certificate mode where you can transport certificates as X509 or the new C509 by value or by reference. This is the gist, really. As to recent updates, other than editorial fixes, I was also trying to give a better overview of the RPK mode as it was defined and being a bit more consistent on the use of public keys versus authentication credentials. Well, the former is the content of the latter. And can be a bit tricky. I made minor fixes in some examples to disambiguate and be sure of the uniqueness of audience value to really distinguish the examples as unique or extensions of a previous one. And the references again, shot you coming again. I also fixed the integer abbreviations used for some CWT confirmation method. That should reflect comments we got from Christian or not wasting values below 24 that are encodable in 1 byte and keep higher values for authentication credentials that are large in size by nature, meaning S5 chain and C5C, done or aligned with the same abbreviation values that are already in registries or as a placeholder in other documents. I also tried to add some more consideration again on the topic of providing credentials by value or by reference. It's always possible by value. Well, the credential is just there to be taken. Of course, it has to be validated and so on. By reference, well, it assumes that the recipient of the consumer has the credential by value, or through the reference can retrieve it from a local storage or from a trusted remote repository. That may not be the case. Things can stall. That's why it's important to have at least one available method to get out of the stall and possibly have some sort of coordination between the client and the SER. And guess what? As an example, a possible method to do that can be a method that we defined already around the Bangkok meeting for the draft I presented just before. And as an example, again, can be the method used for this here. We also added some security consideration on the importance of validating CCS and certificates here, of course, as newly introduced authentication credential format. It was largely about starting from similar considerations that are made in RFC 9528, the ad hoc protocol, where those authentication credential formats are possible. So I literally started from that text and just adapted it to the context of this document, but it's bottom line about the same thing: verify the integrity and the validity, the importance of good trust anchors to not be overridden when receiving self-signed credentials, and revocation services should be supported, and so on. This is a big chunk of the security considerations now. And finally, I had yet another look at the examples. We had quite an extensive set already. I thought of adding 2 more in the set in the appendix, covering hybrid settings where you try to combine RPK mode or certificate mode, or one credential of one type by reference and the other credential of another type by value. So I added other 2 examples where we have the client and the REST credential as certificates, but of the 2 different type, X509 or C509, but both by reference. And another example where we even combine the 2 mode. The client's credential is following the RPK mode. It's a COSI key, but by reference with CKT, and the REST credential is an X509 certificate by reference. So at the bottom of the slide, you see the full catalog of examples. I think there are 13 or something. The most important one and intuitive to understand quickly the gist of the document are in the document body, and there are only 4 in line as the relevant modes and credential formats come. Then we have the stranger hybrid combinations for Appendix A. Yeah, and this is an overview of all the options we have a la carte. I think if you do the math, that allows you to have 121 possible settings, because you really have the freedom to combine the 2 modes, reference or value, certificate of one kind or another, and so on. You can really make the combination you want, and the 2 credentials of the client and the resource server are independent and can be represented and transported entirely independent. There's no dependence of any kind. Just some note with asterisks. Some things were defined already or are RFCs already. Other things, especially the CWT confirmation methods, are defined in the ad hoc underscore profile of ACE that you're represented as the first document really needing them and defining them also for the sake of IANA registrations, while the C509 certificates, of course, are defined in the corresponding document in COSI as credentials as such. So that said, we think all the content we had in mind to include is in the document now, and we are not aware of any more things to do or open points of issues. But even though that sounds like we think it's ready for working group plus code, and we think it is, still, there are 2 normative reference that are drafts, and they are the ad hoc underscore profile of ACE and the C509 draft. In COSI, for the reasons I mentioned in the previous slide, they are really defining CWT confirmation methods, or even the C509 credential that are, of course, core building blocks here. So technically, this can even be considered ready for working group plus code, but at some point, I believe this document has to be stopped, probably at the point of publication request, waiting for those 2 documents to be at least sent to the ISG. So asking for advice to the chairs and the AD on this point and timeline.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. I think my preference, unless Paul has a different one, would be to just hold here and see what happens to those other 2, because then if something changes, it's a little bit easier to update this one. I don't know that pushing to working group last call right now helps us too much.
But yeah, it depends a bit on the stability of the documents, right? If we're just expecting, like, wording changes from the ISG about in the security considerations that are fairly minor and not like fundamental to the document, then I prefer you just push on these documents towards further towards the ISG. If you suspect that there might actually be changes in format, and then it ends up with 4 documents at the ISG that then have to pull back or then have to wait on each other, then it becomes a bit messy. But yeah, it depends a bit on your confidence. Like, in generally, I prefer the documents to just push and wait at the last possible moment. So if they have to wait in RFC editor queue for a cluster for half a year, I prefer that over them waiting them at the working group because then it's much more unclear what the status of the document is.
Yeah, in this case, one of them is actually under our control. So, because one of the dependencies is an ACE document. So,
yeah, just as could I here. I think we had a similar situation in the Anima working group. I think there the idea was, to progress the document as much as possible, but not push it to the RFC editor, because once it's there, it seems to be more difficult to make big changes due to dependency changes.
Yeah, this is a very common issue at IETF. I deal with it all the time in other working groups. So yeah, thank you, Paul, for the advice on your preferences. That's actually quite helpful.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we can all with this, I can keep it alive somehow with minor editing or rebound with it be, and so we can revisit the working group last call when those two documents are more advanced.
Yeah, and let's get in contact after the meeting and figure out sort of where these other two are in the process and how many changes we think we'll expect, and we'll make a decision based on that.
On the good side, this document is abstracting as much as possible, so it's not trying really to touch on details or point to details of those documents, but still, to be on the safe side.
Yeah, the CBOR and recorded cert, since you just use your certs are a black box to you. So I think that one seems pretty safe. It's the other one that I'm a little bit worried that we might have to call back if there's some comments on that one.
Yes, and at least it's in our control. At least
it's under our control, exactly. So we'll just work on pushing to get the OS core profile out, and then maybe just if we can get that pushed pretty quickly, maybe we send them up together. We'll just figure out a reasonable plan.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Hi, this is Militia. So this presentation is about EST score. EST stands for Enrollment Over Secure Transport, and Secure Transport in our case is the OSCORE protocol specified in AD 613. So I'll be presenting the updates to between 07 and 08. 08 was published on 7th of July, resolving the last remaining issues in the document regarding enrollment of certificates by reference, and resolving one issue on the response to the CSR attributes endpoint. So the goal of my today's presentation is to present the resolution to these issues and ask for working group last call on the document. So the first issue is on transporting certificates by references. So just to give you a recap, RFC 9360 defines COSI header parameters that allow referencing a certificate. These are X5T and X5U, hash of an X509 certificate and a URI of an X509 certificate, and then a draft in COSI CBOR encoded cert, C509, defines a hash of a C509 certificate and a URI of a C509 certificate. For instance, ad hoc protocol defined in RFC 9528 may use this in the ID cred field. So essentially avoiding the transport of certificates by value and using references instead on the wire. So EST score, which specifies the enrollment of certificates, aims to support the enrollment by reference, meaning that during enrollment, the EST server sends to the EST client one or multiple references to the enrolled certificate instead of the actual certificate by value. So the way we resolve this is that we define a generic request response exchange on enrolling the certificate by reference, and then when needed, the EST client may resolve the reference to an actual certificate, same as any other party using the certificate reference. This actually how the certificate by reference gets resolved is defined in different documents. So typically, if there is an if it's a URI, then I think 9360 specifies that it's a simple GET request on this URI over CoAP or over HTTP to resolve the certificate reference to an actual certificate. So there are three separate issues that we discussed during the previous meeting with regards of certificates by references, and these were raised in a review by ESCO. So once again, ESCO, thank you for providing that review to us. So the first issue is interoperability during the enrollment. There is interoperability beyond enrollment, constrained device previously acting as EST client and its peers, and then how to resolve the certificate references. So the latter two are essentially out of scope of this draft, but they are defined in other documents in the IETF that use these certificate references. So I will focus on the first issue on the interoperability during enrollment. So essentially the exchange between EST client and EST server. So how we resolve this? In IETF 122, we had a big discussion on essentially transporting certificate by references in EST OSCORE. And since IETF 122, authors of this draft in COSE have specified the media types and CoAP content formats for transporting certificates by references. This is namely application COSE cert hash, because when we transport a URI, it's simply an application CBOR text, I believe, that is transported. So thank you to the authors of C509 draft for doing this promptly. And as I said, at IETF 122, we had a discussion on how to support certificate by references in any format, meaning that in some use cases, we just don't care whether it's a URI, whether the client enrolls a URI, a hash, or just wants any kind of a reference, not an actual certificate by value. So we resolved this in the current document in version 08 through the absence of the accept option. So the absence of the accept option indicates the preference for enrolling a certificate by reference in any format, meaning that the EST client receives application multipart core, so multipart response containing one or multiple references, allowing them to be resolved to the actual certificate. So the application multipart core may also contain the actual certificate apart from the references, and how this actually gets worked out is dependent on the use case and belongs to the application profile. So just to give you a better visual indication of what is currently in the document, you will see here on the top left the first condition that we are making, whether the CSR, so in the request that the EST OSCORE receives, is DAR encoded or CBOR encoded. So in terms of DAR encoding, it's a typical workflow from 9148 EST DTLS, where essentially if accept is present, yes, we just go to the returning we follow the typical semantics of accept, and accept is, if accept is not present, we return PKCS7 certificate by value. So this is in X509 case. And now the optimizations come on the right in the CBOR encoded case. So essentially we differentiated by this. If the CSR is CBOR encoded, if the accept is present, of course, we go to the return following the semantics of accept. But if accept is not present, we return certificates by reference in application multipart core. So I would like to call for any questions on this one or issues that the working group may raise on this slide.
Just a quick question. You had 281 on the slide and you said 287, so I wasn't clear.
So I think it's 281.
Okay.
I think it follows 9148. Okay. So this is in terms of X509. So we don't touch this part, and we differentiate just by by the encoding of the CSR in the actual request, whether we branch left or right. But it's 281 from what I recall.
Okay. Yeah. Well, seems good to me at least. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? So this is essentially what is specified in the document at the moment. So this is on resolving the first issue on transporting certificates by references. And as you can see, we are leaving a lot to the actual application profile on how these get used by the application using this specification. So the next issue is on the structure of CSR attributes. So this is an endpoint in EST that allows the client to retrieve the list of attributes that it should include in the CSR. So before performing a certificate signing request, the client can request a list of attributes that it should include and that should be passed for signing by the EST server. So the semantics is defined in 7030. It's clarified in a LAMPS document, and there are alternative approaches based on, so there are two approaches, one a la carte approach, essentially including the specific attributes, and another one based on a CSR template that is based on RFC 8295 that is also defined in this LAMPS document. So what happens since IETF 122 is that the authors of C509 draft in COSI specified a CBOR encoding CSR template. So this object that you can see on the fourth point, so C509 certificate request template. And we are just adopting this in this document in EST OSCORE. And we are following the alternative approach based on the CSR template when it comes to the CSR attributes endpoint. So a simple resolution, it's a one-sentence resolution in EST OSCORE where we point to section 4.4 of COSE CBOR encoded cert for any semantics or format of the CSR attributes endpoint. So this is the current resolution, and this is this was the last remaining issue in the issue tracker. So with that, we resolved all the comments, I believe, that were raised in last ESCO's review. We have no further issues. So I would like to ask the working group to issue a working group last call on this document, and then we can work on there and see what the working group thinks about the state of the document.
All right, that sounds reasonable to me. Any objections to working group last call at this point? All right, we'll get
just
that.
maybe one note. Sorry for interrupting.
Go ahead.
Just a note, we have a normative reference to the same draft that we discussed in the previous presentation on C509 in COSI. So perhaps, Joran, could you comment on the state of this draft? This is the only normative reference in EST OSCORE at the moment.
Joran Selander. Yes, so this draft, we had presented it at the COSI meeting, and we are basically done with working group last call. We are is one particular issue we have two options for, and that's what we struggle with. So we will submit a new version of that this week, and that will go to the shepherd.
Okay, well, that's perfect. And again, since this document largely doesn't look into the details of that document anyway, I think we'll just send them all forward. All right.
All right.
All right, I believe that is the last of the agenda. So thank you, everyone. Unless there's any last minute business, I think we're done. All right, thank you, everyone. Well, half hour more. No, we requested an hour and a half. We used an hour. Yeah.
Check with RC. Read it again. Yeah, let's see what happened.